Welcome back, very beginners. This is going to be a lesson in blending colors and touching on negative painting. First, let's talk about the brushes. The general rule of thumb is to paint with the biggest brush you can handle in this given space. Well, this is not a big space, it's not a little space. I'm not going to use my 36 brush. It's too big to get into some of the areas. But nor am I going to use this little number 10, which is probably what you're used to. I am going to use number 12. I can get into the little spaces. I've got a nice tip on the brush. And with that, I'm going to show you, I'm going to wet. No, I'm going to take that back, guys. I'm going to dampen. You know, sometimes I think that we talk about wet on wet so often that we think it has to be sopping wet. And when we think about water, we think about wet. This is damp. And while I get my pigments together, I'm going to let it soak in a little bit so that the water is not just sitting on top of the paper. We'll use some fall colors, some oranges, yellows, greens, so on. It's not so much today about the color as it is the technique. Yellow is generally used first. If you're going to use it, it's hard to put on top of something. So I am placing, not necessarily painting, but I am placing some yellow around this leaf. Now you see over here, it's real wet. It's bleeding out into nothing. So is this. For what we're going to accomplish now, that's okay. I'm going to place some orange in here. And I'm going to let them bleed together. Now notice I put them next to each other, not on top of each other. They'll do some blending. If they swish all together and you can't see the separation, your paper may be too wet. I'm going to mix, can you see that? Alizarin crimson with a little bit of green. That's not green, is it? Green, to make it a darker crimson. And I'm going to see it's almost brown, and I'm going to place that in here too. It doesn't take a lot. I'm not interested in having a lot of it. This is the first coat. This is just sort of the first coat. We're going to drip colors into it later. My red, see right there, it's not blending like I would like. It's blending okay. I'm going to encourage that, because as much as I don't want it all to blend into one color, I don't want it to look like the measles either. Now I'm going to look at this and say, do I like it? I do, but let's pretend you don't. What are you going to do? I show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to wet it with water. Now we're talking wet. See that? I'm going to get a paper towel, and I'm not going to scrub, but I am going to blot. And I'm going to pull that pigment up And now the paper is still damp. It's not sopping because the water came up with the paper towel. I'm going to start all over again. You know, watercolor kind of has a bad reputation, and it really shouldn't. It's just not that hard if you learn it like anything else, one step at a time. So we're starting over. Put some orange in. I'm going to come back. Now, what has happened is I brought too much water from my water container to the paper. So I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm going to dry my brush. Do some sopping up. You know, you really, when you're learning, don't be afraid. These are not going to be our masterpieces. We're not even interested in them being our masterpieces. Our goal here is to blend these colors so that you can see them. But if I took scissors, I could not cut around where one started and one stopped. It's a nice, nice blend. So I'm going to let it do its watercolor thing, and then I'm going to mute me so you don't have to listen to the blow dryer, and I'm going to dry it really dry. All righty, that's dry. Now, do you see I'm testing it with the back of my knuckle? I've got hand lotion, everything else. I'm just going to gently test it here. It's dry. I want to show you this. This is the palette made by Palette. It's a Frixon. Where's that word? Palette Frixon. I draw with that. It is an erasable marker. See the eraser on the end. I don't care for the eraser on the end. But what I do like is that I can draw my line. When I blow dry it, it disappears. Now, be careful because you'll also lose your drawing. But some people really object to pencil marks. I don't, but this is an alternative. Now, this leaf needs some veins. So I'm going to put this vein here. I'm not going to use mascoid, and I'm not going to use, which is a resist. Let's not put too many in here. That's where I want to place my veins. Now, this is negative painting. My brush is damp. I've got yellow on it. And I'm going to paint each of these sections. Depending on your paper and how wet it is, you can do one or two at a time. I'm going to come back and add some more of this autumn color. Now see, I've got less water on my brush. It's pretty much staying where I put it. What I want to be careful of is to leave a space in between these two areas. All right, that's dry. My yellow is wet. I'm bringing it straight from the palette. I'm going to lay each of these sections in. Now, that's just flat, but I'm going to add some bright orange to it for fun. Actually, I like that. I'm going to stick some bright orange in there. While it's on my brush, I'm going to come up here. And again, I'm not painting on my line. And if you've used a pencil, you don't want to put, paint on the pencil marks, because that's going to give us the negative painting. Now, negative painting is when you don't paint the object, you paint around the object. For example, I'm not painting these veins. I'm painting around these veins. Now, there's other tools you can use to do this. One of the most common is called Frisket or Mascoid. It comes in all kind of shapes, sizes, and manufacturers. It will dry. Actually, I'll show you. I'll put a little bit over here. Dot, 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 dot. It's going to dry. I'll show you right now. First, it's going to form a crust, kind of like pudding, when you make the pudding and that crust forms. All right, back to the leaf. That's nice, but it's dull. So I'm going to decide, and only because I want to. You could use purple if you wanted to. This is about color blending, not what the color is. Now, if it's this color on this side of the vein, it's going to have some of this color on this side of the vein. Where I have it once, I'm going to put it again, repeat the color. That's better. That's better. Now, fall is a beautiful season, but it's not always full of color. Sometimes there's a little brown. Now, see how many colors that is we put on here? I'm going to leave that alone. Actually, let's put a little down here. If you want to add more red, add more red. You want to add more orange, add more orange. We're practicing here. If it bleeds into no man's land, let it dry, do it again. If it stays where you don't want it, damp brush, and see them on the side of the brush, I'm just going to pull that out. Now, because I have used this palette pen, I'm going to blow dry this again. Those pink lines will disappear, and you'll see the veins, and I'll show you another way. Okay, it's dry. The pink lines have disappeared, and we have negative veins. We have painted the veins negatively. That's going to become very useful. If I want a darker vein, or to make it darker, there is no reason. Now, this is without the little pink line guidelines. I can come in here, use a darker value. Look, put in a new vein. All I did was paint around what would be a vein if we drew it in there. If I want little veins, I do the same thing. There we go. And I've got some smaller veins. Now, what are we going to do? See that big space? Look what I did. Added some more veins. Now, I know you want a background here. I'm just going to vignette this a little bit, which means I'm not going to make a full composition. I'm just going to leave soft edges around here, and we'll get a little background and foreground in here. Now, this is wet, because while this is so wet, I'm wetting up here, this will be drying. It's going to be soaking into the paper. It'll be shiny. When the shine goes away, and this just takes practice, knowing when to go in and when not. There you go. All right. Now again, I'm going to mix green and red, 2 red, add more green until I get a brown that I like. My brush is wet. I took it from the water to mixing the pigment to the paper. I did not knock any of the water off. And I'm going to do just like we did in the leaves. I'm not going to put it everywhere. There we go. Now I'm going to add red, more green, and it's going to have more pigment, less water, and will be darker. All right, see my little puddle right here? Don't like it. I'll deal with that in a minute. Now this is looking mighty, mighty brown. I'm going to put some green, any green in here, and I'm going to go up close to, but not over our leaf. Add some more green. Come up to. All right, see that bleed into that paper up there? It's okay. See that bleed down here? Actually, that's kind of nice. Spread that out. Now, I'm going to leave that alone. Again, this is not, actually, I'm not going to leave it alone. Let's happy this up. Let's put a little yellow right in here. Leave it alone. And do in the sky whatever you want to do. This is not a sky exercise. It's all about blending. But see how these are merging. They're damper than we did the leaf. This is wetter than we did the leaf. See that? I'm going to spread this out. It'll take a minute to put a stem in. I've got to blow dry it again. And we'll put a little stick in there before we stop. Brief lesson on twigs. They're going to be thicker at the base, and they're going to get more narrow. So see, can you see? I'm on the tip of the brush, and I am going off like an airplane. I'm just lightly, lightly, lightly until it goes away. I'm still on the number 12. When I get into these small, small areas, I do want to change to a smaller brush. Now I've gone back to the 10. One thing I want to point out, leaves and limbs are not shaped like worms. If you see them in nature and they're shaped like worms, fine, but they're not going to look natural in a painting. You know, it's our job to, there we go, give our audience a natural look, not necessarily what is in nature. So you have just right up here on the tip of my brush. So I'm going to put a twig here, and I'm going to stop it. Well, I did that wrong. We'll do it a different way. I'll start this branch here. I wanted to start it up under the leaf. Now, do I like that? No. Rinse my brush, dry my brush, blend it in. When you do something you don't care for, that does not by any stretch mean you have ruined your painting. All righty, that's too wet to work in now. So because we're not doing a beautiful painting, I'm going to start up here and I'm going to bring this twig. See how I'm dragging my brush. Now I'm up on the top. You can push it or pull it. It really doesn't matter. You work out what works for you. See, we've got a little twig. We can add another little twig, as many as you want on this practice piece of paper. Now, again, side of the brush to the tip. Does that mean everybody does it this way? Absolutely not. You see that? The paper's still too wet up there. I'm going to dab some paint, whatever's on my palette, over this mascoid. Some of it's not quite dry enough. I'm going to do it over the part that is. And I'm going to let that dry. Can you see that? See that bubble on there? I do not want to get this mascoid in my brush. Actually, I have a different tool altogether. But if you put your brush in a little detergent, Dawn or whatever it is, before you use the mascoid, it should prevent the mascoid from sticking to the bristle. So we'll do that. Now, let's put some little leaves. We're going to pretend it's spring. I've got the tip of my brush. I'm simply placing it, and I'm going to leave it alone. We're not doing great details here. We're just adding a little life to this limb. And they don't have to be attached. But see, I don't want to do it this way. Let me show you. It's contrary. So I'm going to do that with the point of my brush where the point of the little new growth is. Now, that's a pretty ugly leaf. I hope that yours is as ugly as mine because we're practicing blending color. What if I want to put some more on here? I'm going to wet this area. Now I'm going to put some of this green. And what I like for you to think right now is, what if I did this? What if I did that? Do it. See how you like it. Now let's take this mascoid off and I'll show you what I mean by resist. This is a mascoid remover, just rubber. I'm going to rake it over. And when I pull the mascoid up, I will have white paper underneath. I really don't recommend using your fingertips. However, you can, if you want to. But I've just had too many experience where I use my finger, come back, put paint on it, and there is a fingerprint. See how that works? So if you want to save the white of your paper, that's okay to do too. That is absolutely enough for you right now. I look forward to having you in the next little brief lesson. Blending color, negative space is this one. Please don't put pressure on yourself to make it perfect, please. You're practicing, you're learning. Guess what? If you mess it up, you can't stand it, you've overworked the paper, look what I have. The back. I paid for both sides. Now, and I am on professional paper. I'm on Arches. Please practice on the paper you intend to paint on. It handles very differently paper to paper to paper. This is not where you want to spare expenses. You know, if you need to spare expenses, get a water jug or a glass or Tupperware for your water container. But this isn't where you want to spare expense. All righty, until next time, have fun practicing, bleeding, and negative painting.